Everybody that's listening, thanks so much. If you're listening to us on the YouTube, if you're listening to us on the podcast, we thank you also. Please like, subscribe, and share this out to anybody you can. We appreciate it, and we're trying to get these out to as many people as we can as far as interviews, because they are with amazing people that do amazing things all around our country in general. So we thank you for that. Today we have Mark Strauss, and he is the author of A One-Legged Mongoose. We're going to be talking about that in just a second. And Mark, first of all, thanks so much for your time today and spending with us. I'm really looking forward to this interview and excited for it.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
All right. So can we quickly go into telling the viewers that are listening, whether they're listening or they're viewing it with their eyes, a little bit about you in general?
I'm a medical oncologist. I practiced medicine almost 40 years in research, teaching, practice. And then about 10 years ago, I mostly retired. I don't think I've ever fully retired. Doesn't happen when you're an oncologist. And I opened an art gallery in New York City 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
But I've been a writer from the beginning. Science, lots about art. And then I've had 4 poetry collections published, 3 by Tri-Quarterly Northwestern University. The book we're talking about is my first prose book. And this one took a couple of years. It's called One-Legged Mongoose. And it's an unusual title, unusual book. It's a memoir of the years I was 10 to 12, narrated by the boy I was in the 1950s, and narrated by who I was then. Was the only way I could write it. I could remember it completely once I was back in that space. And so the book doesn't have all these things I've learned since then. So we only know what the kid knows, or maybe we know more than the kid knows.
I always think back to, the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, where there's such great artistry as far as acting, music. I just feel like in general, for the most part, people did treat people with respect. There was chivalry back then where there's not as much now. So, obviously there was bad and good at that time too, but those are the kind of things I think about. Talking to the millennials that are listening, Mark, can you tell them growing up about a little bit about the 50s in general?
Well, I think you hit on it. There's good and bad in every period, and no decade invented only bad. This book takes place 8 years after World War II ended. And also, of course, when the Holocaust ended. And those loomed very, very large still in the United States. And I was a very precocious kid, and mostly because of my dad, who was an immigrant, I was really up on all the news. But you're talking about a period where we're coming out of the Korean War. But one of the things that loomed large in this book, I was watching the McCarthy hearings. And for the millennials who may not know what that is, right after World War II, our enemy was immediately Russia. We finished with Germany and Japan, and now the big Red Scare was upon us. And, some kids were frightened by this. What was frightening for me is watching these Senate hearings. McCarthy was a junior senator from Wisconsin. I'll say up front, a bad alcoholic. And he had a subcommittee, and in a 2-year period, he had 150 hearings. And at these hearings, he was free to target people who he accused of having communist ties. And mostly he targeted Hollywood. and we're all getting this.
Yeah, I know.
And
We're all getting
mostly,
it today.
they're
Go
all
ahead.
getting it. And mostly he targeted Hollywood and writers.
Mhm.
And what was frightening, and I think I even understood it then, but the reader's going to understand it, nobody stopped him. Not President Eisenhower, not Congress. I mean, think about what we've gone through in this country in the last year and the tumult and all the controversy and the horror in Washington, D.C. And then post January 6th, you know, who's taking what stance? And this is frightening as well. But McCarthy had nobody putting their hand up and saying this is wrong. And then he went too far and he accused the armory of harboring communists, and they went back at him. And then we had a different newscasting system back then. The anchors were people we looked up to.
Right.
It wasn't the kind of news we have today, where almost every station is polarized.
Mhm.
And one newscaster, the anchor of CBS, Edward R. Murrow, did a broadcast and the dominoes began to fall. He called out McCarthy today. But this book also has much about education and relationships between kids. The book opens up, my God, I remember this so well. I'm in my mom's car. It's a blazing hot summer day in 1953, and I have to go to a Hebrew lesson because my dad has informed me I'm transferring to a school that's going to be 4-hour commute a day.
Wow.
And I have to take my kid brother, who's 3 years younger. And he didn't say why, and we weren't religious. And I had to go to an interview for the school. We lived out in the island in Queens, and I was hoping they wouldn't take me. And why the heck would I want to commute 4 hours a day? And I'm going to my first Hebrew lesson, and of course, I hope they don't take me. And obviously, I wouldn't have written a book if they didn't take me. So I came from a town where we were really very much a minority. There were virtually no Jews. And it was a time when, you know, kids my age only knew what their parents were saying about Jews. And it was tough. And we see so much of that in different ways again today. And we were post-Holocaust. And that was part of our fabric, everyone at that time. And my kid brother, Stephen, he was the kind of kid that bullies smell out. And nothing has changed. They find these kids, and he got picked on. And he was a kid, that's just the way he was. And I knew he was a brainy kid who couldn't defend himself that way. So I became a street fighter, and I was really good at it. And I thought, well, now I'm going to some rough place in Queens. I'm going to have to be fighting all the time. But it didn't quite work out that way. And I wound up going to this very strange school. I mean, you know, going into an ultra-Orthodox yeshiva is very strange. But I came to learn that some of the kids were smart, and I appreciated that. And a couple of the teachers appreciated that I was a kid with a lot of capacity to learn. And my first couple of years in public school, where I grew up, you know, my first year, they punished me putting me under the piano every day. That's how I spent the year. So I went through these huge educational changes, and the whole idea of changing schools and the whole idea of going to a place which is really foreign to you. And then, of course, in the book, we begin to learn that we had in our household some terrible hidden secrets. And they're the kind of secrets that millions of kids have gone through in different ways. And finally, we see some of these things came to the forefront. I mean, the secrets that kids have hidden their entire life or decades. And then you see the horrible story, the women gymnasts or the Penn State football players. And you think, how's it possible that it went on this long? But it's possible. It repeats itself.
Right. Now, so for people that are listening, this is Mark Strauss. He is the author of One-Legged Mongoose. Definitely check it out. I think it's definitely worth the read. I've already read through half of it. My question is, Mark, is that we saw this in Nazi Germany in 1930s when Hitler was on the rise. I want you to talk about this, and this kind of goes into McCarthy and you're growing up in general, because as an immigrant. Do you see this is happening in this country right now? And if you want to connect it to your childhood growing up, that would be great too, because I'm very scared as a person living in this country that, you know, if we don't do something extremely quick, you know, this could happen as it did in Nazi Germany right here. It might be a little slower, but it's starting to kick into gear.
As a kid, I was going to the library. No one talked about the Holocaust, amazingly enough. No one, not even in the Jewish schools until 2 decades later. And then it all began to change. I was a kid who frequented the libraries. I was a voracious reader, but I was quietly trying to read everything I could about the Holocaust. I knew about it. I saw tattoos, but no one spoke about it. I think we just have the capacity never to learn from history. And, you know, racism, the kids my age when I was growing up, how could they be racist on their own? This was stuff they were hearing at home.
Sure.
And even teachers could be openly more racist today. And then I'll conflate this conversation by saying, you know, I practiced cancer medicine almost 40 years. And there's a multi-tier healthcare system in this country that is broken.
That's right.
And it's shameful that a first world country has the worst statistics of a first world country in infant mortality and issues with pregnancy and not getting adequate health care. But as a cancer doctor, you know, Medicaid is way less than perfect. If you have Medicaid, you can get the medications, but cancer medicines is so expensive that go find an oncologist that'll take care of you. You almost can't. So it was very frustrating. And I spent my career as a clinician never turning away a patient. I wasn't able to change the system, but I did the best I could with at least who we are.
Well, you're a good man for doing that, because it's really sick that we do have a healthcare system that is in terrible shape in this country. It's one of the worst in the world for a country that's so established as ours. You know, you go to Canada, you go to Europe, and these countries have far superior healthcare systems than ours, less expensive healthcare systems too. It's just really terrible that we're living supposedly, and I know I'm going to get crap for saying this, that we say that we live in the greatest country in the world. You know, meanwhile, millions of people in our country don't have healthcare. Millions of veterans and regular people are living on the streets every night. I just don't feel like we should be saying that anymore with all these issues that we're dealing, and we're really not fixing at all, period. We're putting Band-Aids on gunshot wounds in plain English with a lot of these problems.
and I'll get off this, but we've done nothing to really fix healthcare.
Right.
And I mean, the war stories I have trying to get people proper care are unbelievable. But the kid in this book, and the book ends just as I turned 12, I understood as a kid that the most important thing to my parents was getting their kids a good education. That was the only way up. And that's true today. And no matter how bad circumstances are in different families, and there are many way worse than I went through, somehow we're not attending in this country, we're not supporting this kind of equal education. And if every kid could get really well educated, everything would be different. We wouldn't even have some of the schisms we have today. But I knew this quiet immigrant dad of mine, for him, the most important thing you could be is a doctor. You know, maybe 40 years later is Goldman Sachs. I don't know. Not that I'm knocking that, but it was very different. And I never thought I would be a doctor. Of course, now your audience knows I am. And I went to college and wasn't even pre-med. And, you know, this thing must have been sitting there the whole time, because then I applied early to medical school saying, well, what the hell if they take me, then I'll think about it. But of course I did it. And my kid brother, my picked on brother Stephen, became an extraordinary doctor and scientist.
Well, it's great to hear because, and again, you know, as people are listening, Mark, first of all, thanks so much for doing what you did do as a cancer doctor and helping a lot of people that couldn't afford it, because it's, again, and I'll jump off this because I got more questions I want to ask before we end the interview. It's just really sad in this country that, you know, we have so much money. We're the richest country in the world. And there's so many people that don't have in this country, whether it's healthcare, houses, food. It's just a disaster and a travesty in plain English. But
we agree. I wrote this book exactly as I remember it, and I didn't know back then I had this unusual memory. But the book ends where it comes to a reasonable conclusion. I think the reader probably perceives this kid may be okay. You know, this kid may come out okay, you know, but that's part of the story. That's part of the story that, you know, we can go through. I really went through some horrific things. We could come out okay. But something not in the book, I just want to add. I understand really some of the trauma many people have gone through. I actually believe we never forget. We can work with it. We can try to grow. We can try to be better. We can certainly try to do better for society. But this is the book that really shows, you know, it's there. It's just part of who you are, like everything else. It's an important part of who you are.
Can we go into this? Because I have a couple more questions before we end, Mark. But I want to ask you this question about the title and the significance of the cover, because we didn't cover that. So what is that significance of the title and also the cover of the book, if you want to go into that a little bit also?
Well, I'll go to the cover first because the press, Greenpoint, has an extraordinary designer. And, you know, I've published poetry books and cancer books, and you think something really simple, not controversial. But as he's developing this cover, he's got all these characters on the cover, and it seems to me it's way too busy, but I'm loving it. And I think he pulled it off. On the cover is Mickey Mantle. I was avid baseball card collector. I was good at it. And, Mantle was in Barra with the New York Yankees. And Sugar Ray Robinson was the boxer ending his career. And I have, I think, a really interesting chapter called Sugar Ray, because the kid I bumped into had that nickname. You have Einstein on the cover, and McCarthy, and Eisenhower, and the Lone Ranger, and Tonto, and my dog Twinkie. So I love the cover. It's gotten pretty nice comments. The title, One-Legged Mongoose, I only found out way after the fact that it's a good choice only because no one ever has had that title. So when you Google it, it comes up first, second, third, and fourth. But the title is an absolutely accurate story. I'm already going to this school now a year, and I finished the first year. I'm 11 years old, and I'm into my second year. It's commute, but things aren't so terrible in the school. And my mother signs me up for this Boy Scout troop. I'm thinking, how the hell am I going to do this? I'm going to school 6 days a week. I'm commuting 4 hours a day. But I go to this troop meeting, and to get your tenderfoot badge, you have to do a weekend outing. So out I go for a weekend, and it's really hazing for a young kid. And we're going to a freezing park out in Long Island. And we sit around the campfire the first night, and the troop leader tells us, boys, we couldn't come here for a few years. The park was closed because for years, a one-legged mongoose has roamed the park. He's half human and half mongoose, and he killed a lot of people. But no one has seen the mongoose in 6 years, so we're okay. And I watched half the kids want to vomit on the spot. And then he said, but we're Boy Scouts. We should go look for it and make the troop famous if we find the mongoose. So off we went to look for this fictional character.
It's hilarious. But hey, that's how you get. Yeah, go ahead.
It was hilarious, but it turned out also to be rather a way in which no troop or teacher could handle kids today. The level of hazing. There was some awful parts about it. And because of other parts of my life, I was a kid who thought, this is bull. There's no chance there's a mongoose. But then there was a 100% chance in my head, like that little possibility is not good. And so I'd already had a lot of problems on that weekend, and we're going along the trail, my group of 4. And the guy says, anybody want to go by themselves down the Ramapo Trail and find the mongoose? And I figured, what the hell, I'm going.
And you're still alive, so of course you didn't get caught by the mongoose, so we're in good shape there. Mark Strauss here on Fire Breathing Rob, again, the author of One-Legged Mongoose. Definitely check it out. With the last 2 questions, I want to combine them together, but because I want you to talk about this. You did write a textbook on lung cancer at age 28, but in general, and you can talk about that, but I want to talk about what made you get into medicine, and then obviously extend, if you could, on writing that textbook at age 28. That's pretty impressive.
Well, I'll drop back a few minutes to say the Vietnam War was on. And right after medical school, you talk about, let's not get too far afield, but if you want to talk about COVID mandates, I was getting inducted to go to Vietnam. And I was there going through my physical, and you don't know anything after medical school. And it was insane. And if you go as a medic, you die. And, I had a little baby, and I'm finished medical school, and they're going to send me out there right on the front.
Right.
And the insanity of the Vietnam War is a huge story. But just before I was inducted to go, a couple of classmates said, did you apply to the National Institute of Health for fellowship? If you got in, that's your military experience. And I must have been the only kid who didn't know to apply. And last second, I applied for 2 fellowships at the National Cancer Institute. Seemed like if by pure miracle they would take me, I would go. Well, they took me, so I didn't have to go.
Yeah.
But I got into a cancer division, and I fell in love with research instantly. And I felt I was home. Cancer medicine was really primitive then. There were very few active drugs, almost no successes. And I wanted to do something. I wanted to do whatever I could. And I was very fortunate. I published a lot those 2 years as a kid. And I got asked to come back to be a clinical fellow after residency. But when I came back, they gave me my own lab, and the head of the department asked me to write this lung cancer book. And I was the kid who said, I could do this, I'll do it. Yeah. And I worked around the clock, and that became a standard text. And we had 2 more editions.
Yeah, it's extremely impressive that you did all you did, especially in that time. And it did save you from going to Vietnam, which is a huge positive. And you ended up making a difference in our country in general, helping people as far as cancer treatment. So again, for people that are listening, this is Mark Strauss. He is the author of One-Legged Mongoose. You tell the people what you hope they get out of this book as we end.
Well, it's narrated by a 10 to 12-year-old, but it's an adult book. Millennials, 18, 20-year-olds. It's not a kid's book.
Yeah.
And it's an unusual story because it takes us back to the actual action. And it's an interesting time in America, interesting time for an immigrant family. And it's a precocious kid with obviously some potential. And I went through some horrible abuse and horrible episodes. But I think the book, what I really wanted in the book, that it's written very well. I wanted that people would pick it up and love the book. I hope that's true. And some of it, I wrote it, but I think some of it's hilarious because, this kid saw the world through different eyes. And, switching to this totally different school and, what he saw and the challenges where he grew up. I think it's very much a story about potential and overcoming things. And at the same time, informative and very fun. And, the book came out today, so I'm going to start getting a lot of feedback.
All right. Well, so far, I think it's pretty good, in my opinion. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you so much.
But we'll end there. So, Mark, as we end again, first of all, thanks so much for the interview, Mark.
Thank you.
And can you tell people where they can find the book and also find more about you online?
My writing website, I have an art gallery, which busy website, Mark Strauss, the name of the gallery. But my writing website, Mark J. Strauss, MarkJStraus.com. So it's even posted the lung cancer book. Why would anybody buy it? But the book is available today on Amazon, any of the bookstores. the ebooks out, the audio books out. The audio is done by a very mature man, and that's cool.
Well, that's good because I am a big ebook person, and even listening to the audio book, I'm big on that too, because you can put it on while you're doing yard work and doing all kinds of things. So, and it gets you through that time. But that's just my opinion. But anyways, we'll end there. Mark Strauss, thanks so much for your time. Again, for people, it's the One-Legged Mongoose. Definitely check it out on Mark's website or at any bookstore that is near you in general. And I'm sure you can, if they don't have it, I'm sure they can get it for
Well,
you.
just go to Amazon Books.
Right. And they'll get it there. So, Mark, thanks so much. I appreciate your time. This was fun.
Rob, thanks so much. You take care.